Good morning and welcome to another Seize the Day. Today is Monday, July 22nd. Holy moly, can you believe that? It's already almost the end of July, but it's a beautiful, bright, sunny sky. Not too much humidity today here in New Hampshire. Trust you guys are waking up to a great day, feeling refreshed and ready to begin a new day, ready to seize the day. Um, we are in the midst of a series called The Songs of Ascent. And we are the Songs of Ascent. For those of you who may not be that familiar with this, there are about 15 Psalms. They're from Psalm 120 to 134. Um, these were songs that were being sung as people would ascend to Jerusalem. Jerusalem was set up on a hill, and so um, the historians tell us that these psalms were sung as they journeyed to the feasts that they would hold in Jerusalem. 15 psalms with themes of repentance and songs about God's presence, His protection, His mercy, His help, His sovereignty. Right, and so these songs of ascent were meant to get people focused on the God that they were going to worship in their everyday experience. So David wrote a number of them. Four were attributed to David, and so we're going to look at another one of these psalms today, and this is going to be Psalm 124. And so, if you would like to turn to that, that would put us in a good spot today as we begin. Um, Once again, I remind you that all of these sermons and everything are listed for you in our BethanyChurch.com webpage, as well as Bethany Church NH, which will be on our YouTube channel. You can find them there. And these are Psalms that we are preaching on the weekend. And then during the week, I just unpack a little bit more for you. But why don't we start by reading Psalm 124? It says, if the Lord had not been on our side, let Israel say, if the Lord had not been on our side when men attacked us, when their anger flared against us, they would have swallowed us alive. The flood would have engulfed us. The torrent would have swept over us. The raging waters would have swept us away. Praise be to the Lord who has not let us be torn by their teeth. We have escaped like a bird out of the fowler's snare. The snare has been broken, and we have escaped. Our help is in the name of the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. What a great, psalm! One in which I would just point out a few things that we have been learning as we go through Psalms. Psalms are poetry, so there's always this economy of words, right? Trying to present thoughts in powerful ways with a minimal of words. They draw word pictures for us, right? So, like for instance, you look here and it says, "Men attacked us; their anger flared against us." So those are put in parallel, right? The attacking, the anger flaring up, right? All of these are indicative of the enemy's response towards them. Also, you look at in verses 4 and 5, right? The flood, the torrent, the raging waters, all in succession that are just building on this theme of taking something from nature and then applying it to their experience. If you've ever um, uh, lived through a flood or saw, the damage that it can cause, boy, there's nothing that stands in the way of raging water, and so you can sense that that word picture is being drawn up to speak about the enemy and their effect that it would have had on them. And so This is these are psalms, short, but we'd like to delve in a little bit to get a little bit more of a sense of what the psalms are, the theme of which these psalms are promoting. So as we do that, this past week we had Pastor Shay Fitzgibbons, um, who is part of our team at Bethany Church, and he is our campus pastor over at our Raymond campus, as well as he heads up all of our support ministries on all of our campuses. Um, just just a great person, and a very good communicator. And so he shared this psalm over the weekend. Uh, let's begin by just looking at a few of these points as we go on, and then what I just want to tell you, like the rest of this week, we're going to look at Psalm 124 today, and we're going to look at some of these themes, and then I think what I'd like to do is take you to a passage that's found in 2 Samuel that I think this psalm is referring to. It's a historical event that took place in David's life and in the life of Israel. And I think it'll give you some really good background on understanding this psalm a little bit better. Okay, so we I want you to just um, think about these movements that you're going to see in this psalm. Right? It starts off, if the Lord had not been on our side, let Israel say, if the Lord had not been on our side when people attacked us. So this is a pause, right? In everyone's spirit that are now looking back on an event that has taken place. It's like this past week when we all witnessed the attempted assassination on uh, on uh, on former President Trump. The slight turn of a head changed his head's position in such a way that the bullet, instead of hitting him directly, just grazed his ear. I mean, you don't get much closer to death than that. And here we you people, they're coming. If you hadn't turned his head at the last minute, if he wasn't looking up at that screen, it was at that exact moment when that bullet was fired that he turned. And everyone talks about just divine intervention, right? God's watch care. And even if you heard you know former President Trump's responses to that, he says he was saved by the grace of God. So this is the kind of feeling that you get here in Psalm 124, where they're sitting back looking at what had taken place, and their reflection on that is this. It says, if the Lord had not been on our side. And then he says to all of Israel, he says, listen, if the Lord, let everybody needs to agree, right? If the Lord had not been on our side when people attacked us. So there is this recognition of God's watch care, right? God's help. And I thought there are a couple of things that take place here, and using the vocabulary from Shay's Pastor Shay's sermon this weekend, I just like to reiterate some of that with you. First of all, I want you to visualize here the severity of the situation, right? It says their predicament, apart from God, would have been much, much worse. If God had not intervened on their behalf, if God had not been on their side, the attack that they experienced would have been severe. And he says, because they would have swallowed us up alive when their anger flared against us. So it seems God, didn't there's a couple of things here, right? First of all, God didn't um, remove this experience from their life. So God is on their side, but they still had to go through this warfare. What does that say? Like, wouldn't you think, like, well, if God was really on my side, then why do I even have to deal with this in the first place? Well, that has everything to do with our understanding of the world in which we're living. Like, sometimes, if there was the removal of all of this aggression, of all this evil, of all this malcontent, this would be heaven, right? But this is never going to be heaven. This world in which we're living now is never going to be heaven. There is going to be struggle in this world. Why? Because this world is under judgment. The rebellion of humanity towards the things of God has placed us in a position where sin is everywhere around us. We just have to open our eyes and take a look, and you see the brokenness that's in the world. I mean, from violence to jealousies to envy to selfishness. I mean, it's all around, and unfortunately, if we're honest with ourselves, it's in us too. We we are seeking, right, to fix our eyes on Jesus, to run this race of faith with great endurance, to no longer be conformed to the pattern of this world, but to be transformed by the renewing of our minds. See, that's a daily walk. That is a constant reminder of where our hope is coming from. And so they find themselves in a predicament, but in the midst of the predicament, in the midst of this fallen world, God is still present. I think of those famous words in Psalm 23, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you are with me. And what does he say? Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. See, even the psalmist understands this is not going to be heaven. There is a kingdom, though, that is coming. And that kingdom, there will be no more tears. That in that kingdom, everything will be made right. There will be a peace that truly passes all of our understanding. There will be a perfection that we could only dream about. But not now, not yet. Not until Jesus comes back and restores all things. His first coming was to make us aware of an open door that God has constructed, a door that invites us to come into a communion with both our Father, His Son, and the Spirit. God places that Spirit within us and calls us into this fellowship. But it's not going to be fully realized in all of its perfection until that day that Jesus comes back again. So until that day, we have to contend with a broken world. But God has not left us here on our own. He didn't do that with Jesus. I mean, think about it. Jesus was perfect. Jesus was in constant communion with his Father. Jesus displayed a power over all of creation, right? Walks on water, raises the dead, heals the blind, right? Like multiplies food. Like there are countless ways that you look through this New Testament and realize that Jesus is demonstrating an authority, not only in his teaching, but in his actions. And yet, with all of that, did he not have to contend with the vitriol of the people around him, to the point where, because of their jealousy, because of their ambition, they want to take Jesus out and they conspire against him to the point where they take his life, put him on a tree, and they feel satisfied now, like, wow, this is done. Only they didn't realize they were playing into God's hands, because by Jesus giving his life on that tree, he did so as a substitutionary atonement for you and me. It was the Passover lamb that was now sacrificed on behalf of all of those who have put their trust in him. And so, consequently, what they thought they were doing to get rid of Jesus, in fact, all it did was open the door for all of us to enter into this kingdom of heaven. But it came at great cost, didn't it? Jesus entered into this broken world and had to deal with of, all of its, evil and wickedness. And he came that willingly because he loved the world. God gave his one son so that whoever believes in him would not perish but have everlasting life. So one of the things here is you realize, okay, we could be in a fallen world, but God could still find a way to come alongside of us and bring and bring victory, right? So as we go on here, I want you to think about that one idea here of visualizing this severity, because apart from God, this would have been a different story, right? Um, it says here that the people came bent on violence. It says they were attacked. They would have swallowed them alive as their anger just flared against them. I mean, they found themselves now in a fight for their lives, and from an enemy that wanted to annihilate them. And you're going to see, we go back. This has everything to do with with a number of battles that David had to experience, and we'll get to that at the latter part of the week. But for now, in this setting, it's enough to realize that people were bent on their destruction. And it says, and the effects of that would have been like a flood that just engulfed them, a torrent that just would have swept over them, raging waters that would have just swept them away. If you've ever seen pictures of this flood damage, right, and houses being swept away out into the raging waters, yeah, you just realize this is no joke, right? It's devastating. And what I find interesting here is that David would conjure all of this back up. Why do you think he would do that? Have you ever had, maybe some trauma happen in your life, and what you want to do is you don't even want to think about it. Yeah, you try as best you can to divert it, not go there anymore. But it's still deep down inside of you, and if we're not careful, it becomes like a stake that is driven in your life, and you just never get away. And we just live our life, but it's always tethered to this stake of an experience that we've had years and years ago. And David appears here to be bringing everybody back to that event. You could almost hear people in his setting saying, "David, we don't want to talk about this. This isn't good. Like we'd rather move on. It's enough to say that God, yes, God was on our side. Why don't we just leave it at that? But why remind us again of that war? Why remind us again of that of the of that battle? Why remind us of what could have happened? Because all it does is it just brings us into a bad place. But one of the things I think is that God seems to want us sometimes to think about these things, because he wants you to know exactly what David is saying in the beginning, that we need God on our side. We're not going to be able to fight all these battles on our own strength. But in our weakness, his strength is made sufficient. Greater is he that is in us than he that is in the world. Right? So there is nothing that has overcome us except that which is common to man. And God is faithful. He will not allow us to be tried beyond what we're able to bear, but with every trial, he provides a way of escape. See, this is the gist of the opening of this psalm, right? God is testing them, and he wants to develop further trust. Um, he wants to demonstrate his power in their life, and in that, David is trying to just say, look, in adversity, um, it's okay for us to think about these things, because what it does, it just reinforces God's hand and God's way. Again, I just think of this recent assassination, and every time you talk about it, it is good for them to think about what could have happened, because all in that conversation, it always comes right around to saying, unless God had intervened, the probability of all of that happening in an instant, you know, it 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 demonstrates God's watchfulness. And now for Trump, he's got to sit there and think, what does all this mean? Right? For everyone, we got to see it live on television. Um, there is something about the testing of a man's character that is going to reveal something about who he is, right? And sometimes I think when we go through these moments, and you look back and you see God's hand in these things, it's a moment of reflection to recognize how much how in need we are of God's provision and of His grace. And I think it's a good thing to visualize this severity. You know, sometimes I don't think we think about this enough. There are these moments when we have to face, some of the trauma that we may have faced. It does no good to just let it go without talking about it. Um, I recently had a conversation with with a you know a dear sister in the Lord about persecution, that in the world it's going to come, that there is going to be this aggression that we feel in the world, that they're going to position themselves and place believers in positions where they're made to look like they're the ones who are seditious, that they're the troublemakers. If we just get rid of them, everything would be fine. They will lie, they will persecute, right? They will say all manner of evil against the believer. And this is not to say that sometimes believers don't act in an unseemly way. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is, if you're trying to do God's will in this world, you're going to feel like a salmon swimming upstream, because that's exactly what happened to Jesus, who did this perfectly. They wanted to silence his voice. They wanted him out of the picture. And it did not go well, for Jesus for a period of time. But he also experienced God's the power and the provision that his Father placed to him, because as Messiah, Jesus laid aside this glory, right? He came to do the will of his Father, and the Father demonstrated great power in Jesus, even in the midst of all the adversity. And so here, life, it can feel like a flood. It could feel like a torrent. It could feel like raging water. And you're hanging on for dear life. But once you go through that experience and you look back, you have to say to yourself, well, how is it that I've stood? Because I'm here. I survived. I made it. And you recognize that the grace of God has been demonstrated in your life. And so now what are you going to do with this life? What are you going to do with the rest of these days? You cannot allow these experiences to keep you in one spot. God wants us to learn from these things. He wants us to experience something of his power and his provision. Otherwise, we're never going to let go of it. And it'll haunt us in our sleep, in our waking moments. And yes, sometimes we need to go for therapy, to talk it out, to be a part of support groups, maybe, that people who've experienced these things, especially if it's great trauma. But I also believe that God wants us, just like in this text, to recognize that he is our help. And what the evil one means, for the evil that is perpetrated against us, God says, I can turn that around. And so when you sit there and you think, man, if the Lord had not been on my side, this could have gone so terribly. But the upshot of that is that God is on our side, and he's going to use all these things for his good. I think of that famous passage that's found in the book of Genesis when Joseph discovers, when his brothers discover that Joseph, who they thought they had left for dead, right, and was sold, right, into slavery, is now Pharaoh's right-hand man. And when Joseph confronts them, he says, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. Because in that moment, Joseph recognized that he was in a position now to really rescue all of Israel, because there was a great famine in the land, and Joseph was now in charge of all the food supply. So it's in the passing of time. In the moment, it may not seem this way, but when you look back, you realize, boy, the flood, the torrent, the raging water, it didn't sweep me away. I'm still standing by the grace of God. Well, we're going to come back and look a little bit more at this psalm, but I hope you're beginning to recognize here is God's provision for us. And to sing these songs is to recognize that everybody, we go through challenges in this life, and God is saying, listen, I'm with you. I will protect you. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. And one day I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Well, I'm looking forward to the rest of this week. We still got a little bit more to go on this psalm, and then we're going to take a look at 2 Samuel, where I believe this psalm was based on. Well, my friends, thank you for joining me this morning. I hope these words were an encouragement to you. Let's fix our eyes on Jesus and run with endurance this race marked out for us. Seize the day. And never forget that God is good all the time. Thank you so much for joining me on this Monday, July 22nd, and Lord willing, we'll see each other again tomorrow. God bless.